And join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Today, we explore the Tory leadership in depth. We've spoken to some of the key candidates in the race and their representatives. All that to come after the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Suella Braverman says she's backing Liz Truss as the next Tory leader after being knocked out of the leadership race yesterday. The Attorney-General says the Foreign Secretary is the candidate to unleash the opportunities of Brexit. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak won the most votes, with Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt coming in second. The remaining 5 candidates will go head-to-head tonight in the first of 3 televised debates. Another 2 rail strikes are now taking place next month. RMT members at Network Rail and 14 train operators say they'll walk out on August the 18th and 20th in a dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. It's after RMT and ASLEF members announced they'll be striking on the 27th and 30th of July. The NHS are facing a surge in hospital admissions amid the heat wave that's affecting parts of the country. The Met Office has issued an amber extreme heat warning across England and Wales from Sunday until Tuesday. Temperatures are due to peak in excess of 35 degrees. In other news, in Sri Lanka, celebrations after the president's resignation was announced and accepted by Parliament yesterday. Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled to Singapore earlier this week after protesters broke into the presidential palace. There's been unrest over the economic crisis in the country. The Prime Minister is currently serving as acting president while the election process gets underway. And Ivanka Trump says she's heartbroken following the death of her mother, Ivana Trump. The businesswoman described her mother as brilliant, charming, passionate and wickedly funny. Former President Donald Trump confirmed his ex-wife died in her New York apartment. She was 73. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News Now. It's back to Tom with The Briefing.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Straight now to the Tory leadership race. Yesterday afternoon, contender Suella Braverman became the latest candidate to be eliminated, coming 6th in the contest. Well, I caught up with her just after the vote and this is what she had to say. Suella Braverman, firstly, congratulations, coming 6th. It's no mean feat in the big array of candidates that are there. And now you have the unenviable title of Kingmaker. What are your thoughts at this stage in the race?
No pressure. Thank you for the congratulations. That's how I see it. We ran a really clear policy platform on illegal migration, on Brexit delivery, on tax cuts, on identity politics. And I have to say, I'm just so blown away by the positive response that I got personally and on my policy platform. I want to thank all of the MPs who voted for me, put their faith in me, my team of MPs who worked incredibly hard, my staff team, the party, the 1922 committee. I just feel a huge amount of gratitude and actual privilege to have just run to be Prime Minister of this country. I think that's awesome. And my proposal is that we need to now leave the European Convention of Human Rights and exclude the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights.
Is that a red line?
Well, I want a candidate who's going to come close to that, and I'm going to look for the candidate and the person who does come the closest. So that's a really big priority for me, because if we keep failing on this issue, the British people won't forgive us. Secondly, I want someone. I was the only authentic Brexiteer in the contest. I'm going to have to look for someone who comes close to my credentials. So, because we need to deliver on the Brexit promises, remove regulations, make sure people feel that they are better off and that it was worth it, and that Northern Ireland still remains part of the UK. I want tax cuts, and I want a firm line on identity politics. So those are my tests that I'm going to be applying.
It sounds of the remaining 5, there are 2 who are closer to your ideology, who are closer to your wing of the party, Liz Truss and Kemi Badenoch. Would you rule out the other 3?
I'm not ruling anybody out, actually. I genuinely have an open mind. I'm talking to all of the candidates. I'm listening and looking at all of them. So, no, at this stage, I genuinely haven't made up my mind.
You've been pretty critical in the past of the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak and his record of the economy. You have said about how you've spoken out internally, of course, in government about the high tax burden this country is suffering beneath. Would it seem wrong? Would it seem like you're going back on your word, were you to then go and join Rishi Sunak's campaign?
Well, I think these contests are very unpredictable. There are lots of factors at play. So policy is a very important factor, but your personal relationships with people are also really important. A lot of people have voted for their friends in this context, and sometimes I've been really astonished by some of the alliances that we've seen. They may disagree on policy in very kind of vivid ways, but they're actually supporting each other. So I think there are lots of factors. I'm going to have to weigh up all the pros and cons. It's not easy. I thought that I was the best candidate. I'm clearly not. I need to find someone who will be.
One of the big narratives emerging in this election is that the free market right, those sort of Brexity right candidates, have had a very divided vote, split between 3 candidates at the last round, whereas other wings of the party quickly coalesced around a candidate. Is it your view that there needs to be one candidate that everyone coalesces around, and potentially more candidates need to drop out before the next round?
Well, I think I hear that point of view. I mean, people were telling me to drop out. And as a candidate, I really think that it really has to be the decision of the candidate themselves. We have a competitive process for a reason. We have a contest. And I think that it's important to honour the process of that contest and allow a full airing of views. And I actually personally don't think people should try and game it or play the system and drop out prematurely. I actually think it's helpful for members and those deciding to have the fullest possible opportunity for scrutiny.
Suella Braverman there, and since that interview she has of course endorsed Liz Truss. Not just Suella, but also Brexit Spartan Steve Baker and European Research Group Chairman Mark Francois as well, writing to those 60 MPs signed up to the ERG, urging them to get on board the Truss train. Well, why is that, when famously Liz Truss herself voted Remain? Well, it's not as surprising as it might first sound. For many in the ERG, Brexit isn't simply about leaving the EU, but taking the advantage of the freedoms that offers. The vision post-Brexit is almost as important as the act of leaving itself. Now, let me say this as someone who enthusiastically campaigned in favour of leaving the European Union. There is no economic advantage to leaving a market and its rules unless you take advantage of then setting your own rules, of freeing your domestic economy from many of those stifling regulations. If you fail to do that, you will have, in an economic sense, pointlessly increased friction between yourself and your neighbour for no economic benefit. That is, unless, of course, you change your rules, more than compensating for that friction with a more dynamic and better regulated domestic economy. Liz Truss understands this. That's the main reason why Suella Braverman, Lord Frost and Jacob Rees-Mogg are supporting her. It's about the next step of Brexit, taking advantage of the freedom to do things differently. In short, regulatory divergence. Well, Rishi Sunak, of course, came first yesterday, but he hasn't yet guaranteed a spot in the final two. Yesterday, I caught up with a significant supporter of his, Matt Hancock. Matt Hancock, your candidate Rishi Sunak is underperforming compared to the front-runners of contests past. Why is that?
Well, he's just won the second round, so he's got over 100 MPs backing him. It's a very wide race. I think that's a good thing. To get almost a third of MPs backing you when there are 6 candidates is very good, and a big increase this time. And he's winning the argument as well, especially about having his economic plan, credible economic plan. And when it comes to the polling that really matters is who can beat Keir Starmer and make sure that we don't have Starmer and Sturgeon splitting our country up. The answer to that question is Rishi Sunak.
Now, you took a little bit of time to decide who to back and eventually plumped for Rishi Sunak. At that stage, he was the odds-on favourite to win. Now he's second in the minds of the bookies, potentially because he's not polling that well with Tory party members. Do you regret the decision?
No. In fact, I feel incredibly comfortable with the decision because I took a decision based on who I think will be the best next Prime Minister. There's a long way to go when it comes to the debate amongst members. I think it's highly likely Rishi will be one of the 2 candidates who goes forward from here, not least because he's already got almost a third of Tory MPs backing him. These are the people who know the candidates best. And he's got the plan, and also he's been through so much scrutiny, both of himself and of his plan, that scrutiny will come onto all of the candidates, and I know that Rishi will shine through that.
Now, Suella Braverman has dropped out of the race. She takes a number of supporters with her, of course. What's Rishi Sunak's pitch to win those supporters over?
Well, do you want to have the person who has the credible economic plan, who can win and save this country from Starmer and Sturgeon? If you want those 2 things, then you should back Rishi Sunak. He's got what it takes. He's got the character, he's got the plan, and he's the one that the country thinks is better than Keir Starmer, and that's good enough for me.
Now, Rishi Sunak's been running the economy for the best part of the last 2.5 years. His plan has been what has been running this country. To some extent, do Tory MPs not want to see a change in economic policy? Want to see more growth-focused and lower tax in terms of how the economy's run?
Well, you can't be more growth-focused than Rishi Sunak. I mean, the guy is a massive supporter of all the parts of the country, parts of the economy, the sectors of the economy that are growing fast and are going to shape our future. But you've got to have a credible plan. You can't just say things that might sound good or you think might sound good. You've got to have a plan that can actually deliver and is grounded and responsible, and that's what Rishi Sunak has got. And if you think about it, this country has had the most intense economic headwinds. Getting through the pandemic, where the furlough scheme and all the support for small business was absolutely vital. And then the inflation shock that's come from a combination of China still trying to pursue this impossible zero COVID strategy, and of course the war, which has led to the sharp rise in energy prices. Those are the 2 big negative impacts in terms of them pushing up inflation. We've got to grip inflation first and not do things that might make it worse. And that's what Rishi's plan is all about. Get growth going, get inflation down, and cut taxes when we can.
Aren't there taxes you could cut that would in themselves bring inflation down? VAT being an obvious example.
What you can't do is pump up the economy further and pump up inflation more by loosening fiscal policy at a time of high inflation. We've got to remember the lessons from the past. Nobody in policy-making circles, whether officialdom or in politics, was there when inflation was 10% or higher last time, 30, 40 years ago. You cannot forget the lessons from the past. It was Margaret Thatcher who said sound money must come first. In fact, she said sound money is the basis of sound government. You've got to get inflation under control first, and of course cut taxes when you can. And if you listen to some of the people who worked with Margaret Thatcher, they're exasperated at her being paid in aid for the idea that you can have unfunded tax cuts that can't be afforded. And if you think actually about Rishi, he grew up in a pharmacy, in a chemist shop, understanding that family budget, understanding the way you've got to make ends meet. That's what we've got to do today, and that will get us out of these economic challenges whilst focusing on the exciting industries of the future that Rishi is a big champion of.
His classmates at Winchester College might disagree that it was the most ordinary background in the world, but I want to just speak on this idea of inflation, because is £37 billion of spending, not all of it funded, raising $5 billion with a windfall tax and then spending £37 billion, does that sound fiscally responsible?
Well, if you look at the books at the Treasury, they add up and they get debt coming down. And that's what we need to do as a country. We need to get debt coming down, inflation coming down, and taxes coming down. We shouldn't be trying to choose between those and just go for one of the three. We've got to have a responsible, credible economic policy. And when it comes to Rishi's background, born in a pharmacy, to a mum who's a pharmacist, a dad who's a GP. He got a scholarship to a great school. He got into a great university on merit. He was then a successful businessman. These are things that we in the Conservative Party value, we care about. That is great, and it's great that our country can produce an exceptional individual like Rishi Sunak by giving them a great start that he, through his hard work, has been able to build on. And if you think about it, look back 50 years, two people come to this country to make a better lives for themselves and their family, and their son has been Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think it is a great positive story, and I want to see more stories like that, and I admire people like that, and that's one of the reasons I admire Rishi.
Now, just finally in this conversation, we've got two candidates left in this race of five who would describe themselves as being on the free market right. You've got one candidate in Tom Tugendhat who might be more of a One Nation caucus person. You've got a candidate in Penny Mordaunt who might be sort of Cameroonian liberal conservative wing. Where does Rishi Sunak fit?
He's a conservative, and he unites a broad church of the Conservative Party. And I think that's another one of his many advantages.
Matt Hancock, thank you.
Thanks very much.
The former Health Secretary supporting Rishi Sunak, in case you hadn't guessed from that interview. Well, Lee Rowley is a former business minister chairing Kemi Badenoch's insurgent campaign. I caught up with him yesterday before the vote, this was, about why he thinks Kemi is the best person for the job. Lee Rowley, Kemi Badenoch has been a pretty standout performer so far in this contest, coming from declaring her campaign very recently to being a contender. But the right is split. What she is saying is the same thing, more or less, as what two other candidates may be saying. What marks her out?
Well, I think she's saying something pretty different, and she's saying the Conservative Party and the country is at a crossroads. We need to do something different, and that difference needs to be rooted both in traditional, timeless Conservative values, but also recognising that we are in a country which has got some challenges, which has got some problems, and has got some big things it needs to decide in the future. But it's her analysis and her approach which is different. The systems analysis, saying I'm going to go back to first principles, I'm going to ask why government is doing things that it's doing, I'm going to think through and then decide what policy is. That's a really refreshing approach, which is why I joined her campaign and why I really hope she succeeds today.
A lot of Conservatives will really like what she says, but they'll be questioning whether she can actually get there. There's going to be a heart and a head decision here. What's your answer to that charge?
Well, there was a heart and head decision at points in the past. I mean, Brexit, I wasn't personally sure about what to do, but I went with my heart and I voted for Brexit back in 2016. And I think here, if people are having that question in their minds, I would go with your heart. Ultimately, the Conservative Party has been in power for 12 years. We've done some really, really good things, but we have to make clear to the British people that we have a clear agenda about where we want to go into the future. That starts in your heart.
What do you say to the reports that there have been discussions between Kemi's camp, Liz Truss's camp and Suella Braverman's camp about trying to unite that vote that is talking about trying to move the party on in a different direction, with the risk that the final two might be people who are asking for more of the same economic agenda?
So Kemi's fighting to win. She's in it to win. She's very serious about it. She is new. She is a fresh face, but she's had good experience in government, in some really tricky portfolios, in some really difficult briefs, and she's done something in government, and that's the really important thing. So we'd be delighted, absolutely delighted for colleague support today. We'd be delighted for anybody else running to back Kemi. We're getting more and more endorsements, more and more people say that she's got what it takes, and we hope that people will do that, and we hope for a good result today.
She's very young. She's never been in the cabinet. Are these points that hold her back?
I don't think so. It's not necessarily about what you've done, it's about what you've done with it. And all of the briefs, all of the portfolios, all the ministries which she's been in the Treasury, she's been in Equality, she's been in local government. They are chunky portfolios with big decisions to make, and she has made them, and people have noticed because she's been willing to say, we need to do this, we need to change that. I'm not just going to accept what the civil service say. That's the kind of leader I want.
Fourth placed yesterday surprised some. It was quite a good showing from someone from a standing start. What would be a good showing today?
Well, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals, but I was really, really pleased yesterday that we made progress, that we got so much support from colleagues. And what I hope will come through this afternoon when it's announced, is that Kemi is gathering momentum and that she is getting more people who are supportive of her. But the race is long. We've got many, many, many more ballots to go, and we want to show progress today. But we also just want to keep Kemi's message out there that she is absolutely serious about this and that she can win and she can be a Prime Minister that changes our country for the better in the future.
Lee Rowley there, chairing Kemi Badenoch's campaign. Of course, she stayed in fourth place yesterday. Well, moving on now to our final story of the day. Nicola Sturgeon has said she wants to meet the next Prime Minister for talks over her plan to hold a new partition referendum next year, rerunning that vote that in 2014 she described as once in a generation. Boris Johnson has repeatedly said that now is not the time for a further vote on breaking up the United Kingdom, but might Nicola Sturgeon find less opposition from a new Prime Minister? Well, let's discuss this now with political commentator and columnist for The Herald, Ian McWhirter. Thanks for joining me, Ian. I suppose, first of all, does Nicola Sturgeon see political advantage in this changing process for a new Prime Minister?
No, there's disadvantage here because Boris Johnson, for various reasons, mainly because of his personal background and his accent and his upper-class style, has been extremely unpopular in Scotland, even more unpopular than David Cameron and Margaret Thatcher, even going back that far. So he has been a great recruiting sergeant for the SNP, and his loss will make it much more difficult for them to attack his successor, particularly if his successor is someone like Rishi Sunak, who is, he's Asian. It would be more difficult to accuse him of being racist because, of course, the drumbeat here has been that Boris Johnson was a racist, that he was a misogynist, he was a sexist, and this has been endlessly recycled in Scotland and has become a kind of conventional wisdom. It's much more difficult to attack any of these likely successors to Boris Johnson in the same terms that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP have categorised Rishi Sunak and previous Tory leaders.
Because we don't really like to talk about identity politics. It shouldn't really matter whether a Prime Minister is a man or a woman, is from an Asian background, is from a different background. But it is now almost certain that the next Prime Minister will not be a white man. And you think that, in and of itself, no matter the policy, that might take the wind out of the SNP's sails a little?
Well, it won't entirely, obviously, and particularly because so many of the candidates are talking about a kind of reheated Thatcherism, that we need to cut the state, we need to have low taxes, etc., and that evokes images of austerity under George Osborne, of the closure of Scottish manufacturing industry under Thatcher and the recessions of the 1980s. So, there's a limit to this. But I wouldn't underestimate the extent to which the fact that the Tory party is now, bizarrely, because you don't think of the Tory party as being into identity politics and into wokeness, that this Conservative leadership campaign is extraordinarily diverse. I mean, you only have this token white man in Tom Tugendhat who's likely to get dumped on Monday, and that will have a significant impact because so much of the SNP's appeal in Scotland, the way it's trying to present itself as being not just like nationalist parties in other countries, like in France, for example, but being a more diverse, more liberal, more pro-LGBT kind of organization. Nicola Sturgeon has traded on this for many years and has always attacked conservative leaders like Boris Johnson for being for being essentially racist. I mean, she called him a racist. She called him a misogynist. That is going to be much more difficult to say in future.
Really interesting dynamic there. Let's get on to the legality now of what Nicola Sturgeon can do. We keep hearing about this potential for a wildcat referendum, an illegal referendum. Is that seriously being considered by the Scottish Nationalist Party?
No, and Nicola Sturgeon has always made clear she would not support a wildcat, unlawful referendum of the kind that we saw in Barcelona, in the Catalan region of Spain in 2017, which led to disastrous outcomes. She has always set herself against that, much to the frustration of many in her party who really want action, because the Scottish National Party dominates politics at every level in Scotland. It has more MPs than all the unionist parties combined. It has more MSPs than all the unionist parties combined. It dominates everything, and yet she hasn't been able to move the dial on independence. So there's great frustration. So what she's had to do is try to move things along. And one of the ploys is to take this issue of whether or not Scotland can mount an advisory referendum, to take that to the Supreme Court and get a Supreme Court ruling that actually, yes, it's perfectly reasonable for the Scottish government, it's perfectly within its powers to hold some kind of big opinion poll on what people want in terms of Scotland's future. I don't think for 1 second the Supreme Court is actually going to go along with that, because anything to do with the Union, anything to do with the Constitution is reserved very much to Westminster. The Supreme Court is the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, and in some ways I'm mystified that the SNP has seen fit to try to use this institution to promote their referendum. Now,
I suppose it's all an argument of what looks good rather than what might actually work. I'm really sorry to say that we've run to the end of the programme there, but it's been a delight to have you on. Ian McWhirter, thanks for joining us. Well, coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick Christys, but first, here's the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Early rain for some this morning. Showers then follow for northern England and Scotland, but warm sunny spells are expected elsewhere. And it will turn sunnier through the weekend with increasing temperatures, a substantial rise in those temperatures by Monday and Tuesday. High pressure is building in, but just ahead of that high as it advances from the west, an area of cloud and some outbreaks of rain for parts of Scotland and northern England first thing. The rain quickly clearing Northern Ireland, 1 or 2 showers here, but it takes some time for northern parts of England and Scotland. 1 or 2 showers for mid Wales, but otherwise plenty of sunny spells for southern England.